So over the course of this video, we talked a bit about how grid has some differences with its default dynamic and static counterpart. For this update, we also wanted to add one additional thing to static grid to just help set it apart. And if we go to static grid, notice that the moment that I switch from dynamic grid to static grid, that we get a lot more toggles whenever it comes to static grid. And that's because static grid's a lot more special, a lot more customizable. So if we click on the drop down, we see, most of our typical options. However, there's now an option for toggling the floor overlay. So if we toggle the grid overlay, this means that whenever we bring up the grid, it actually gets rid of Blender's grid. So you can see it disappearing whenever we hold control. We can press tab and it just locks in place. We could shift right click in order to extend this grid out, and then when we press escape, the grid actually comes back. So really that's all that option does. However, when it comes to the floor is something that isn't counted as part of that grid. However, if you toggle this option, we see that the grid floor is also capable of disappearing. So if you want only one grid to rule them all during the time that you're actually just using the static grid by itself, this is the option for you. So really it's nothing fancy. It's just a way for you to toggle the floor overlay in addition to the grid overlay whenever you hold control to bring up the static grid. Also delineating the static grid from the classic grid is the grid mode color, which is a classic, but if you ever want your grid to be reflective of the operation that you're starting in, red for cut, if you have it under green, that means you're in join mode. If we set it to be purple, then you already know that it's inset time. But in the event that you want to customize your static grid, these options are still available and are still being expanded. So just letting users know, always in front is always good. In the event that you want your grid to always be in front of your view, for example, we have this grid paused on this particular face, but it's not showing its intersection that's happening with the rest of this mesh, and this curve that's sitting on top of it. So if we toggle that off and we turn off, or actually not auto transparency, always in front, we see that now the grid is actually obscured by the mesh that remains. So in the event that we draw a cut, we could press tab, press E to extrude it out, and we're basically cutting that area off. So just a way to visually see what's going on whenever you're using static grid a certain way. In fact, I'll press tab to pause this, E in order to extrude it the opposite way. And just like that, we're able to use this grid to kind of slice this area out.